Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today's episode 3 in this art vlog series. If you're new here, this is a series about me documenting my process in creating my very first children's comic. I've always wanted to create a comic book or children's book or create some type of story, but this is just me taking the opportunity to actually get down and do it and document it along the way, and also just share what I learn along the way with everybody else online. And yeah, if you haven't seen any of the 2 episodes, you can check them down in the link below. The first episode was just a brief idea of my first draft attempting to create this book, and episode 2 was more of a brief introduction into the characters, some of the main characters, and how I thought about certain aspects of them, like their names and designs, etc. But yeah, if you enjoy this series, then I would really appreciate if you can give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Like I say, it always goes a long way. And without any further ado, let's get into it. So in this episode, we're going to be tackling my writing process. So I'll start off by just taking you through what my natural process was. So this was basically just me just attempting to create a book with not really knowing anything. So this is just like naturally what I did and what I thought to be logical. And then the other 2 sections, which I found via Jake Parker's YouTube account, which is a story pyramid concept, which is quite helpful, and the 8-step writing process that he follows, which I also thought was quite helpful and just helped me solidify my story and feel like I was on the right track. Okay, so let's begin with my natural process, which was my first draft. So when I started this whole idea, I just came up with this basic checklist, and there are a few items on the left that you can see which we needed to have before I can continue. And initially, like whenever I was writing stories or I had stories in my mind, there was always like this one thing that I needed to have that excited me, or something that I wanted to build a story around. So like in this case, I wanted to have a kid or young boy fighting a monster with like a sword or whatever it was. And then have your genre, which in this case is action, adventure, fantasy. Have a main character that is your hero of the story, like in this case Ray. A setting, which I knew was Earth and was going to be another world, but at the time of creating this I didn't know it's called Moonland, but I just knew that I wanted to have a boy go from one world to another. And then have your beginning, your middle, and end, which in this scenario was starts at Ray's home, introduces him to Moonland, and then have some epic battle at the end. And also, just before we continue, I want to have like a quick disclaimer. I always have like a lot of people tell me, oh Razi, don't give away too much of the story, because then people want to buy the book, all of that stuff, etc. Yeah, this whole process is not about me creating a product to sell necessarily. It's more, yes, that will be the end result, but this whole journey is about me learning how to create books so that I can continue doing this in future, because it's always something I wanted to do. So whether I give away too much or too little doesn't really matter, because I do want to share as much as I can in terms of what I'm learning, and I hope that becomes beneficial to whoever's watching this or anybody that wants to do what I do at the end of this, because I think once I have a product and people will be like, oh, how did you create this, then at least the documentation of that entire process is online. So yes, I'm well out, and I might give away quite a lot of the process and story throughout the series, but so be it, because the intention is to create educational content and not necessarily what the end product is at the end of the day. So I've already showed this process in episode 1, but at this point in time when I was working on it for the first time, I didn't know it's called log lines. But yeah, so what you're doing is just writing out the story line for line, describing each scene as you go along, and that's what I did. I wrote my first draft of the story completely like that, and then I take these log lines and I put it on these squares which represent pages, and the log lines will be at the bottom just to give me an idea of what the scene is about, and then on top in bold I would just put the description of what I want the scene to look like. So for example, you can see a close-up of the closet. And yeah, what I did at this point also, when I had a lot of these pages, I could see the green would represent a page that I was happy with, the yellow would mean that I still need some work, and then the red would be not necessarily happy with the way I have described something or the idea of what the image would be, so that needs some work. And then I'll take that description and and add the next step. I'll add the script, and I will add some dialogue, and also give myself an idea of what I want the page to look like in terms of like, is it double spread, is it spots, is it vignettes, or what do I want on that page. And then yeah, so that's more or less how I went about doing it. I thought logically that made sense when I was working on this the first time, and yeah, I pretty much managed to do this for most of the book. So yeah, my process was quite simple. I created a checklist, I created log lines and described each scene. I took each scene and I did a description of what I wanted the scene to look like, and then I took that description and I added a script and dialogue on the page, and then I would do a simple scamp and sketch out the scene, do a quick storyboard, and then I'll end up with the final. And logically for me that made sense without having any prior knowledge of how to write a story or anything along those lines. This process just worked for me. But yeah, this is my first attempt last year when I was working on it. And then as I did some research on how to write and some writing techniques, I wrote the story 2 times over to where it currently is now. And I'll show you one of those techniques, or 1 or 2 of those techniques next. Okay, so what I'm about to show you next is a concept that I came across on Jake Parker's YouTube channel. I'll share the link above or below somewhere. So Jake Parker's the illustrator that came out with Inktober. So the story pyramid. Story pyramid, I'm not sure if it's a method or anything, but it's a concept that I came across that I thought made a lot of sense to me in terms of how to structure my story. And I thought it would be a nice thing to share quickly. So story pyramid, what it comprises of, it starts with your design, your plot, your characters and settings, and then conflict and resolution. So your design is basically, what does everything look like? What's the shape, language, what's the colors, line, proportion, composition, tone of the visuals that you are creating. Your plot is, how did it happen? So basically just describing the plot, the story of everything, sequence of events. And then who made it happen? So who are the individuals that took place within the plot that actually made everything? Your heroes, your villains, what are their motivations, what are their needs, wants, what are their personalities like? So all of these are aspects that you actually need to jot down and understand when writing your story in order for everything to make sense as to why characters will do what they do. And then the most important thing is, why did all of this happen? So what is the series of events that took place in order to act as a catalyst for this conflict to happen, for everything to just take place and to actually create the story that happened. So this was quite nice of a concept. When I came across it, I actually sat down and I looked at all these elements, especially my characters and who they are, what their motivations were, why would the specific conflict that takes place, or this event that takes place, and why would somebody like Ray actually take action. But yeah, I thought it was a nice thing to add. But yeah, next I'll take you through the 8-step writing process. So the 8-step writing process. So the first one is what he calls idea capture. So similar to what I did at the beginning, naturally what I did was I wanted this idea of something to tell a story about. So he calls it idea capture, and in this scenario, for me it's a boy going into another world fighting a monster. So find that idea, find something that excites you, something that you're willing to write a story around. So it could be anything. It just needs to be something specific that you can create a story from. So then finding the conflict would be step number 2. So in my scenario, in my story, I have the Darkling, which escapes from a prison or a chamber and then threatens all of Moonland, and basically if left unchecked it would spread to Earth. So that event happens, and that's what causes the story to begin basically. And then your first draft. So this is a concept that first draft, what I wrote here is something is better than nothing, and you can only improve if you have nothing. You can only improve if you have something to work on. So creative first draft. So this is something I speak about not just in writing stories, but in life in general. Like I always have this conversation. Just do something. the moment you have something, you can improve on it. But if you just keep on talking about something, or you just have this idea in your head and you don't put it down on paper, you actually have nothing to improve on and you can't move forward. So this is actually quite important. It took me a long time to actually start writing my story. I just had this idea in my head and I started drawing characters, and it was a big mess up. But the moment you actually start writing, or the moment you actually start putting your idea on paper, it's there, it's real, it's tangible, you can actually start improving on it. And yeah, this is a very important step, and I just felt important to emphasize. Step number 4, once you have your first draft, you obviously want to work on the rough part. So like for me, for example, there was a lot of elements in my first draft, it didn't make sense, or not that it didn't make sense, it was a bit too complicated, and required a lot of illustration, for example, or a lot of explanation. So there are some ideas of areas that was a struggle for me in my first draft. So for example, the Moon's life cycle. How do I get Ray and Lunara to relate to each other? And then I wasn't very confident about my intro, but those are all things I worked on in the second and third draft, and I became more comfortable with. And then number 5, I'll take you through a visual version of this a bit later, but just to give you an idea, this is what they call beats. So I noticed, like when I was doing more research in storytelling, they use this term called beats, which is basically just steps, another word for steps. But anyway, story beats. So in this diagram, basically what I'm just showing here is things that need to take place. So for example, these are the steps of the story, like I just mentioned, but for example, in the first one, what is your normal world? So the normal world, what that means is, what would the world look like if that conflict or that event never took place? So the normal world is just Ray being afraid of the dark. So if the Darkling and the Mooners never exist, Ray would just be a boy afraid of the dark. But because this specific incident happened, which is the next step, in the inciting incident, for example, like Luna runs into the closet, Ray runs after and encounters small monsters who introduce themselves as Mooners, and then they tell Ray their plight, and now the stakes get upped, and if Ray doesn't help them, the monster will come for his Earth. So the normal world is everything that would have happened as per usual, but because of the specific inciting incident, which is your conflict, certain things need to now happen next. And then so that's basically Act 1, and then Act 2 would be Ray and his party go through the portal and enter Moonland. And then your midpoint, I have the Elder. Basically I have some type of character that explains Ray the depth of what's actually going on. And then I have Act 3, where you have Ray and his party set out to go confront the villain, which in this case is the Darkling. And then you have your climatic battle that breaks out, and you have a resolution where everything's resolved after the battle. And then in step 6, write scriptment. So scriptment, basically, from what I understood in Jake's video, is a hybrid of script which includes dialogues, events, and panel descriptions. So this is similar to what I did in my process, where I have my dialogue and description of what I want the scenes to look like. So that's pretty much what he's doing there. And then story trust is also a nice concept, but I think most people do this naturally. But it's important to identify individuals that you can actually read your story to and tell them about. But they needs to be the type of people that are willing to critique you and not just accept everything you say. So here's my story, oh, it's good, but they actually need to go through the story and say like, oh no, that doesn't work, that doesn't make sense, why didn't you try this out? So it's people that you can give you constructive criticism, and then you basically just follow that process on and on. So you revise and polish, and I thought this 8-step writing process was really cool. By the time I came across it, I was pretty much done with mine, but then I applied this to my story and it worked quite well. So it actually gave me the confidence, like, oh, I am on the right track. So yeah, so I just wanted to share this process with you guys. So just to give you a quick breakdown of what the story beats are in like a little bit of a visual. So I just put it together so you have a quick idea of what's going on. So it's a nice way to do a flow chart of your story before you actually go into depth with a lot of things. So for example, my normal world's a boy afraid of the dark. My inciting incident is them entering the closet and finding the monsters. Then they ended up on Moonworld. Then they meet the elder that explains everything to them. Then they break into Act 3 and they go and confront the monster. And then the climax is the epic battle. And then you have the ending, which is the resolution of them solving the whole problem of the story. And that was kind of like a loop that I had. I like the idea that in my story you go into another world, solve the issue, and then you come back. And that was kind of like a loop, because now I'm in a situation with the way I wrote the story is I can write multiple stories in that loop. So every time I can make an incident happen, and Ray goes through into Moonland and continue that process. And I can continuously, endlessly create a loop of a story, which I thought was a nice way of writing. So that's everything I had planned for this video. I think for the next video, what I would most likely do is either design the logo and take you guys through a logo design process, because as you can see, I'm currently still using a placeholder text at the moment. Or alternatively, I would do a new cover design. Now that I have the story completed, maybe I have a little bit more of an idea of what the cover could look like, and I think that could be a fun project as well. So yeah, I'll still decide which one of the two I'll do. But yeah, keep an eye out for that video coming up next. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Stay safe. Bye.